She drove 40 minutes in her best dress, 7 months pregnant, and they sat her alone at the kitchen counter while another woman took her chair, her seat, her place at the family table. Her husband didn't move, not even when his mother picked up the crystal pitcher, not even when the ice water hit her shoulder in front of 11 people. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she just finally understood something she had been refusing to see for 4 years. And what she did next changed everything. Welcome to our channel where we tell the stories no one talks about out loud, family drama, quiet betrayals, and the price people pay when they think love means making yourself smaller. The lesson this story carries: the most dangerous thing isn't the person who hurts you, it's the version of yourself that keeps making excuses for them. If you've ever forced a smile and said, "of course," when you wanted to walk out, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling us which part hit hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, subscribe because we post every single week and you don't want to miss what's coming next.
Stay with us for Cicely's story, because this is not just about a woman being shamed. It is about the moment a woman finally leaves the kitchen table to go build her own. It is for every woman who has taken the extra chair in the other room and pretended it was fine. It is for every woman who loved someone with her whole heart, only to find that giving that love to the wrong person can cost you absolutely everything: your career, your confidence, and your own voice. It can even cost your sense of what you truly deserve. This story does not promise a billionaire brother will rescue you. It promises something much more real. It promises that your own moment of clarity is coming. It will show up in a place you do not expect, at an hour you do not expect, in the form of a glass of cold water, or from behind a locked door, or in a hospital at 4 in the morning. That moment will feel uncomfortable, but it will be eye-opening, and it will cost you something you thought you could not live without. And on the other side of that moment, if you keep walking forward and don't turn back, there is a table with a place for you. It's a table you built, surrounded by the people who truly chose you. It takes 1 second, and it ensures this story can find the next woman who needs it. We will be back soon. The sound of silverware on fine china drifted down the hall, along with warm, comfortable laughter from people who had known each other a lifetime. And then a single voice cut through it all, quiet and deliberate. "I assume Grant told you to come in through the side today, Cicely. We have a full house." Cicely Harmon stood frozen in the dining room doorway and could not move. At 7 months pregnant, her feet were aching from the drive. She wore the blue dress that her friend Nora had helped her buy 2 weeks ago, the one that made her feel like her old self for the first time in ages. Her hands gripped the doorframe until her knuckles were white. The baby gave a single, hard kick. No one had said anything about a full house. Grant's exact words that morning were very clear. He had said them over coffee while looking at his phone. Just mom and dad. Nothing fancy. An hour tops. The dining room had 11 people in it. Cicely counted them without thinking. It was a habit she had, counting things, steps, breaths. The number of times Dorothea called her cranberry sauce a nice effort. 11 times in 4 years, she had counted. There were 11 people in that room, and at the far end of the long table, in the very chair Cicely had occupied for 4 years, the one Dorothea always put her in because it was convenient to the kitchen, sat a woman named Sloane Whitfield. Sloane was in a cream-colored sweater, her hair styled perfectly. She looked at Cicely with an expression that was not guilt or embarrassment. It was not even shock. It was something that looked a lot like victory. Cicely's gaze then shifted from Sloane to her husband. Grant was standing by the buffet table with a glass of water, talking to his cousin. He was laughing at something his cousin said, and then his eyes met hers in the doorway. When he saw Cicely, his face changed. It was not quite guilt, but more like the look of a man who was hoping a problem would just go away and now realizes it will not. He did not move. He did not set down his glass. He did not walk over to her. He did not say her name. The thought hit her. He knew. Of course, he knew. She thought, I drove 40 minutes and put on my nice dress, and he knew she was going to be sitting in my spot. Douglas Harmon, Grant's father, stood up from his chair. He was a kind man with sad, gentle eyes. He had once told Cecily that she was a good woman, and she knew he meant it. She had held on to that for 2 years. Cecily, dear, Douglas said, come in. Let me get you a seat. She is fine where she is, Douglas. Dorothea's voice was never openly mean. That was her specialty. Cecily, we have set up the kitchen counter for overflow. You will be much more comfortable there. It is less noise. Better for the baby. Better for the baby. Cecily considered this statement from every angle, as she always did with the things Dorothea said. She always tried to find the most generous way to interpret things first. Today, she could not find one. She forced a smile. She said, of course. She walked toward the kitchen. She counted her steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. She did not allow herself to cry until she was around the corner, with one hand pressed against the cold surface of the refrigerator. 3 breaths in, 3 breaths out. The kitchen was filled with the smell of Dorothea's roast. It would be perfect. Everything Dorothea cooked was perfect. Cecily could never make a good roast, a fact that had been brought up gently and with no malice 11 times in her 4-year marriage. She had counted that too. She sat down at the kitchen counter. It was a small, cluttered work surface, the kind used for junk mail and grocery lists. There was one place setting, 1 plate, 1 glass of water, 1 fork and knife. Someone had set this up before she got there. Someone had known she would be here, alone, at this counter. This had been planned. Her baby kicked again, a slow rolling motion this time. As if asking what was wrong, Cecily put both hands on her stomach. I know, she whispered. I know. She picked up her phone, opened it, stared at the home screen, and then closed it again. There was nothing helpful to do with her phone at that moment. She did not have the words for what had just happened to her. Not yet. She set it face down on the counter. Through the serving window, she could hear the sounds from the dining room. The clinking of glasses, the warm sound of people who belonged together, eating and laughing and sharing food. She had sat at that table for 4 years. She had always brought the right wine. She had always complimented the flowers. She had laughed when she was supposed to and stayed quiet when she was not. And she had always taken up exactly the amount of space she was offered, and not 1 inch more. She thought about the job, a promotion she was offered the year before she and Grant moved. It was for assistant principal, a job she had wanted since her 2nd year of teaching. She turned it down because Grant's job was moving to a new city, and she had thought, we are a team, and this is what couples do. They make decisions as one. She thought about that choice now, sitting alone at the kitchen counter with the smell of a perfect dinner in the air. She picked up her water glass with both hands and just breathed. The serving window was open a tiny crack, and through that crack floated Dorothea's bright, warm voice. The one she used for people she approved of. Sloane, I want you to know, no matter what happens, you will always have a place at this table. Whatever happens. Cecily set her water glass down very gently. Her hand was shaking. Whatever happens. She stared at the single plate in front of her. 1 plate, 1 glass. With just 1 fork and knife, she finally got it. She wasn't at the kitchen table for peace and quiet. Dorothea put her there because she had a plan, and that plan did not involve Cecily at the main table. The baby was silent. Cecily laid a hand on her stomach, waiting. The kitchen door squeaked open with its usual soft sound. A noise she knew well in this house. She knew it was Grant without even looking. The very air in the room changed when he walked in. His voice was low, controlled, the one he used for handling problems, not people. "Can we please not do this today?" he asked. She hadn't spoken at all. She was just sitting there. She finally looked up at him, holding his sparkling water. "I did not know she would be here," he said. Cicely always knew when Grant was lying, but not from the big tells. He was good at hiding the big things. She caught him in the small details, like the tiny lift in his voice at the end of a sentence, making it a question, or how his eyes would dart to her forehead when he felt unsure. He was looking at her forehead right then. She asked her first question softly. "How long has Sloane been coming to your mother's house?" Grant's jaw tightened as he shifted his feet. "It is just a work thing. Mom invited the entire team." "The whole team?" Cicely repeated. "How many people from your office are at that table?" Silence. "One," Cicely answered for him. "Just her. How long, Grant?" He paused too long. "Since August," he admitted. Cicely showed no reaction, but her mind did the math. August. It was now mid-March. 7 months. Sloane Whitfield had been a guest in this house for 7 months. The same 7 months Cicely had been pregnant. She had visited this house 14 times in that time. She had been seated at this kitchen table twice before. For the overflow guests, Dorothea had explained both times. How very convenient, Cicely had thought, and then let it go. She was letting the wrong things go. "Does your mother know?" Cicely asked. "About you and Sloane?" Grant stood perfectly still. "There is nothing to know. That is not what I asked." The silence that followed was heavy, thick. Cicely sat in it, reading it just like she could read a classroom. She had been a teacher for 6 years. She knew exactly what a silence that long and that heavy really meant. Dorothea knew. Dorothea had known the whole time. The kitchen table was never for overflow. It was a holding pen, a place for the inconvenient wife, while the other woman sat at the family table, hearing Dorothea say, "You will always have a place here." Cicely whispered it, a fact, not a question. "I am not crazy. I know what I saw." Grant flinched. She studied the man she married 4 years ago in a garden, while her mother cried and her sister Nora stood beside her. This was the man who proposed on a rooftop, who held her hand during her father's surgery, and who told her once that she was the only thing he was ever sure of. She wondered when he had lost that certainty. She wondered if she ever really knew him. "Why did you not tell me she would be here?" Cicely asked. He started, then stopped. "I thought it would be fine." "You thought it would be fine," Cicely repeated, not with anger, but for clarity. "You thought that I would show up at your mother's house, find Sloane in my seat, and that it would just be fine." He stared at her forehead. She thought about December. She'd found a text on his phone, not because she was snooping. She had grabbed the wrong phone from the nightstand in the dark. The text was simple: a restaurant, a time, and a single kiss emoji. She had put the phone back and lay awake for hours. In the morning, she asked. He told her it was a work dinner. He said it was for a client, and that Sloane had set it up. He said it with the voice he used for the truth. No high pitch, no glance at her forehead. She had believed him then, because she had to. Now she knew she had to believe him because the alternative, this awful truth at 7 months pregnant, was too much for her back in December. She was not sure if she was ready now, but she no longer had a choice. "Did your mother invite her today, knowing I was coming?" Cicely asked. Grant's silence was the only answer she needed. Her phone vibrated on the table. It was Nora. "You have gone silent, which is a bad sign. Do I need to come over? Because I will." Cicely almost smiled. She was typing, "I am fine," when a noise came from the dining room. A sharp, deliberate splash. Then she heard Douglas Harmon's pained voice, so unlike him. "Dorothea, that is enough." Then there was a different kind of silence. A shocked electric silence. Cicely was already heading for the door. It all happened because she went back. She heard Douglas say her name, and then she heard the sudden quiet of 11 people holding their breath. Something inside her, the part that had been quiet and polite for 4 years, made a decision. She was done sitting in the kitchen. She pushed the door open and stepped back into the dining room. Sloane had been talking when she walked in, talking about the nursery, about the pale green color they had picked, and the crib they had ordered. These were details Sloane should not know. Details that could have only come from Grant. The room hushed as Cicely stood in the doorway. Dorothea was already standing. Later, Cicely would try to recall what she was looking at in that final moment. She thought it was Grant's face, wondering if he would finally step in, if he would finally stand between his mother and his wife, something she had needed him to do 100 times before. She never found out. Dorothea reached across the table and picked up the heavy crystal water pitcher. With both hands, steady and calm, she poured it. It was not an accident or a slip. She poured it with total control and purpose. A long, slow stream of ice water hit Cicely's shoulder, soaking her blue dress all the way down to her hip. The room was now quiet in a different way, a deep, bone-deep shock. The water was freezing. Cicely stood perfectly still, feeling the cold seep into her skin, her dress clinging to her, heavy and wet. She felt the baby give a sharp, surprised kick inside her, the way she did when there was a sudden noise. She felt all of this and said nothing. Dorothea placed the empty pitcher back on the table. It made a small, precise sound. "I believe it is time for you to leave, Cicely," she said. Her voice was calm, almost sad, like she was talking about the weather. "You have been causing a scene since the moment you got here." Causing a scene? She had been sitting by herself in the kitchen. Grant had not moved an inch. He was in the exact same spot as when she arrived, glass in hand, eyes on her. She now recognized his expression. It was the look of a man watching the consequences of his own actions unfold, realizing he was not prepared to handle them. Douglas was on his feet, his face a strange gray color. He looked like he had witnessed something he could never undo. Sloane was frozen, but she was not looking at Dorothea. She was looking right at Cicely, and her expression was not victory. It looked a lot like shame. Cicely scanned the room, and then she laughed. It was not a broken or crazy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who just understood something vital and could not believe it took her so long to see it. She turned and walked out of the dining room and through the kitchen. She grabbed her purse from the chair. She always knew where her purse was. Her mother, Caroline, had told her that when she was 17. Always know where your purse is. A woman should always be able to leave. She went into the downstairs bathroom and locked the door. She sat on the cold bathtub edge, fully dressed, soaking wet, and 7 months pregnant, in Dorothea Harmon's house on a Sunday afternoon. The bathroom smelled of expensive sandalwood soap. The tile was cold against her wet dress. She placed a hand on her belly. The baby moved again, a slow, rolling motion this time, as if to say, "I am here. I am fine. We are okay," Cicely whispered back to her daughter. Inside the locked bathroom, she whispered, "We're okay," to no one in particular. She just sat, breathing deeply, in and out. 4 minutes ticked by on the small clock above the toilet. That was all the time she allowed herself. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Nora. When she called back, Nora's voice was already edged with panic. "Cicely, you just disappeared from the call. You sound off. What happened?" "She poured water on me," Cicely explained. "The whole pitcher. I'm in the bathroom. My dress is completely soaked." Nora's silence was nothing like the quiet in the dining room. It was the sound of a friend weighing her options for revenge and choosing the best one. "I'm calling Reed," Nora stated firmly. "No, Nora, please don't. I don't want—" "I can handle this," Cicely insisted. "I just need a moment." Nora's tone was final. "I am calling Reed. You can be mad at me later. I'll deal with that." Then the line went dead. Cicely lowered her phone, staring at her reflection in the mirror over the sink. A dark stain spread across the left side of her dress. Her hair was mostly dry, and her face, she noted with some surprise, was calm. She expected to see a reflection of how she felt inside. Exhausted and broken, like something had just ended. Instead, she saw a woman who had just heard a truth she already knew deep down. Now she just had to decide what came next. That was exactly it, she realized. Her phone rang again. It was Reed. He answered on the second ring, before she even had a chance to think about what to say. "Sissy." Just one word. Her name, the short version. It was her childhood nickname, used only by Reed, Caroline, and their father, who'd been gone for 3 years. And just like that, the tight knot in her chest began to loosen. "Reed," she said, "something happened." "I know," he replied. She frowned at her own reflection. "Did Nora just call you?" "Not from Nora." Cicely fell silent. "I need to tell you something," Reed said. His voice had that careful, precise tone he used when every word mattered. He was always precise. It made him a brilliant businessman, sometimes a difficult brother, but always reliable in a crisis. "I should have told you earlier," he said. "I was waiting for you to be ready. So I'm asking you now, are you ready?" Cicely met the eyes of the woman in the mirror, with her soaked dress and steady gaze. "Yes," she answered. Reed had known about Sloane for 6 weeks. He didn't use a private investigator or any official methods. Reed simply had people, quiet, careful people who made it their job to know things. When Cicely came home for Thanksgiving, she had a look he remembered from when she was 9, trying to hide that something was wrong. That's when he started paying attention. He had been putting together options for her, he explained. Not a legal case, just options for when she was ready. "And if I had decided to stay?" Cicely asked. "To try and work it out? Then I would have erased everything," Reed said. "And I never would have brought it up." She believed him without a doubt. "Don't move," he said. "I'm 20 minutes away." He made it in 19. From the bathroom, Cicely heard the doorbell ring. She heard Dorothea's footsteps, the distinct click of her low heels on the hardwood floor. They were unhurried, commanding, the steps of a woman in total control. The front door opened, and she heard Reed's voice. "Where's my sister?" Cicely unlocked the door and walked into the hallway. From there, she could see all the way to the entryway. Reed stood in the doorway, wearing his dark coat. He had an expression she had only seen 3 times before. Once in 6th grade, when a boy shoved her into a locker, once when their father got his diagnosis, and once, 6 years ago, when she called him at midnight from a strange parking lot, confused about how she got there. That look meant business. It said, "I am perfectly calm, and I am taking care of this." Dorothea had regained her composure. She stood in the foyer, dressed for Sunday, her chin held high as always. She gave Reed the same look she always did, a faint, calculated condescension, as if his success was something she generously acknowledged, but was not impressed by. "Mr. Calloway." Her voice was almost warm, almost gracious. "I'm not sure what Cicely has told you, but this is a private family matter, and I would ask you to respect our privacy." "She told me," Reed said flatly, "that you poured a pitcher of cold water on her." There was an accident. She's 7 months pregnant. I am well aware, Reed replied. Your grandchild is inside that woman, the one you just doused with cold water, in your dining room, in front of 11 people. He paused. I just want to be sure we're talking about the same thing. Dorothea's composure didn't break. It was one of her true talents. But something shifted behind her eyes. A quick recalculation. She was reassessing Cicely. Cicely had seen her do this 100 times to other people, but had never been quick enough to counter it. Reed could. He was always 3 steps ahead. If Cicely would like to. Cicely is coming with me, Reed announced. Tonight she'll stay at my place. Do you have a problem with that? Grant finally appeared at the end of the hall, without his drink. He just stood there, hands at his sides, looking back and forth between his mother and his brother-in-law. He had the look of a man caught between 2 strong forces his entire life, never learning to be one himself. Reed, he started. I know you're concerned, but if you would just let me. You let your mother pour cold water on your pregnant wife, Reed stated, and then you just stood there. The hallway fell completely silent. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. It was the absolute truth, and everyone there, including Grant, knew it. I'm going to explain something to you, Reed said to Dorothea, because I don't think you grasp what happens now, and I want you to. Not for my benefit, for yours. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Reed built a $900 million company by knowing exactly how much pressure to apply in any situation. And he always applied it perfectly. He was applying it now. He explained, calmly and without emotion, that he had a meeting Monday morning with a lawyer named Carter Webb. He noted that Carter Webb was quite familiar with the Harmon Family Trust's finances, and that certain activities from the last 8 months were of special interest to him. He said none of this had to be unpleasant, but it would be very thorough. Dorothea remained silent, but her face spoke volumes she was too controlled to ever say. Cicely headed for the front door. She had her purse and her keys. She also had the card Douglas had slipped into her hand in the hallway. She hadn't looked at it yet. She felt her daughter, 7 months along, steady beneath her hand. Near the door, she passed Douglas. He was standing off to the side, in the shadow of the stairs, looking like a phantom but watching a disaster he couldn't stop. One he had failed to prevent. He wasn't a bad man. She had always known that. He was just a man who had consistently chosen comfort over courage for 35 years, and now he was living with the results of that choice. She didn't hate him for it. She actually understood. He had given her a card. She would check it in the car. I'm sorry, Cicely, Douglas whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. She gave his arm a quick touch as she walked by. Outside, the March air was sharp and cold on her damp dress. Reed led her to his car, not touching her, but close enough to catch her if she stumbled, and far enough to let her walk on her own. He had always been like that. She got in. He drove for 3 minutes in perfect silence, which was exactly what she needed. He always gave her space first. Then he said, Tell me everything, from the very beginning. Cicely glanced at the card in her hand. Carter Webb, family attorney. On the back, in Douglas's handwriting, he's good, he's discreet. Call him, I'm sorry. She tucked the card into her purse, watched the city lights blur past the window, and began to speak. They were parked in front of Reed's apartment building when she finally stopped talking. It had been 22 minutes. She knew because she'd been watching the dashboard clock, counting the minutes like she counted everything else. Reed hadn't uttered a single word. He just drove, listened, and kept his hands firm on the wheel, with his gaze fixed ahead. That was how she knew he was absolutely furious. When Reed got quiet like that, it meant his anger ran deep and was under perfect control. The car was silent. How long have you known about Sloane? Reed finally asked. Cicely looked down at her hands. I saw a text back in December, on his phone. I picked it up by accident. It had a restaurant name, a time, and a kiss emoji. What did he say when you confronted him? That it was a business dinner, something Sloane set up for a client. She paused. He said it perfectly, like it was the absolute truth. And you believed him? I believed him because I had to, she said. She turned that phrase over in her mind. It sounded weak when spoken aloud, but she knew that wasn't quite right. It was something much more complicated than weakness. It was closer to survival. I was 12 weeks pregnant. I had just moved out of my apartment and into his house. I didn't have a job. I needed it to be true. Reed gave a single, sharp nod. He didn't say anything to make her feel worse than she already did. He never did. She thought of the memories that had been replaying in her mind since the scene in the bathroom. They came in brief, sharp flashes, not the big, dramatic moments. She had very few of those. It was the small things. The first Christmas with his family, when she brought her mother's special cranberry dish, and Dorothea had pushed it aside without even a taste, saying, "We have a system for the holidays." She had laughed it off. In the car on the way home, she told Grant, I think she really liked it. And she had actually believed her own lie. Then there was the pregnancy announcement, the positive test on the counter, the look on Grant's face when he saw it. The pause that lasted just a second too long, followed by a simple, huh, just that one sound, and then, I'll call Mom. Not, let's call your mother first. It was his mother, his news to deliver, the night she had stayed awake in the dark. She had opened her phone and typed Sloane's name into Instagram. She scrolled through the pictures, searching for some proof of what she both wanted and didn't want to see. Afterward, feeling ashamed of her own snooping, she deleted her search history, as if she had to hide her suspicions even from herself. She told Reed about the late-night searches. He listened with a blank face, which meant he was even angrier than before. You've been holding all of this in by yourself, he said. I thought if I could just keep it together, get through the pregnancy, and get back on my feet, I could finally have that conversation. Cece, I know. She rested her fingers against the cool glass of the car window. Outside, the afternoon had turned a dreary gray. I deserved better than this, she whispered to her reflection. It wasn't a cry for pity. It was a simple statement of fact. I've known that for a while. I just didn't know what to do about it. Reed said yes. Nothing more, just that. They went inside. Reed's apartment was exactly what came to mind when she thought of him. Expensive but not flashy, and a little sparse, because he valued open space. It was deeply comfortable, in the way a place becomes when someone has truly considered what comfort means. He made her tea without asking, chamomile with honey. He had kept it in his kitchen ever since she was 22 and had gone through another crisis, spending 3 weeks on his sofa. She now sat on that same sofa, warming her hands on the mug. The baby shifted, a long, slow roll across the left side of her stomach. Cicely placed a hand over the spot and held it there. She's active, she told Reed. He was in the chair across from her, his eyes on her hand. A look crossed his face, protective, fierce, and almost vulnerable, before he smoothed it back into his usual calm. She gets that from her mother, he said. They sat in silence for a time, with the city sounds 14 floors below. Her phone screen lit up on the cushion next to her. It was Grant. She saw it. Reed saw it. She flipped the phone, face down, without a glance at the message. He's asking you to come home, Reed stated. He's asking me to make this easier on him, she corrected, looking into her tea. He has always asked me to make things easy for him, and I have always done it. I am very, very good at it. She placed the mug on the coffee table. I am done being good at it. Reed studied her for a long moment. What do you want to do? He asked. And Cicely, who hadn't known what she truly wanted in 4 years, who had been so focused on managing and adapting that her own desires felt like a forgotten language, just sat with the question. She didn't rush to give an easy answer. She simply let it be, and slowly, in the quiet of her brother's apartment, with her tea growing cold and her daughter moving gently under her hand, an answer started to form. It was 2:47 in the morning. Reed's guest room was dark and quiet. The city hummed 14 floors down. The sheets were high quality. Reed didn't own anything that wasn't, and the pillow had the perfect amount of softness. None of it made a difference. Cicely was wide awake. She had been since 1 o'clock. She knew because she was watching the clock on her phone, the same way she always did at 1 in the morning when her thoughts grew too loud. She opened the Notes app. She had been a list maker since she was a little girl, a habit from her mother, Caroline, and her grandmother before that. When your world feels out of control, you write down what you know. You make the facts solid. You look at them, lined up, and you see which ones you can change and which ones you just have to bear. She began to type. Things I know. 1. Grant has been with Sloane since August, at least. 2. Dorothea knew. She has known for months and planned for it. 3. I did not know. I had my suspicions, but I chose to look away. 4. Douglas suspected. He gave me Carter Webb's business card. He's not completely useless. 5. My daughter is due in about 9 weeks. 6. I have no job. I stopped teaching when we moved for Grant's career. I haven't worked in 14 months. 7. The house is in both of our names. 8. I put $40,000 of my own savings into the renovation. 9. I love him. Or I think I do. Or maybe I just love the idea of him I once believed in. 10. I am not sure what is worse, loving a real person who let me down, or loving a fantasy that was never really there. She stared at her list. My first thought was, I was so stupid. Then she stopped herself. She had been fighting that thought all evening, not because it was wrong, but because it was not the whole story. She hadn't been stupid, she had been managed. There's a big difference. Stupid means you didn't have information that was right in front of you. She didn't lack information. She was fed a carefully edited version of reality by a man who was an expert at it, and by a mother-in-law who had been controlling outcomes for 62 years. She had not been stupid. She had been trusting. She had wanted to believe in the best version of her own story. She loved him, and that love made her give him the benefit of the doubt over and over again. She closed the Notes app, she lay in the dark, and for the first time let herself truly feel the anger. It was not the fiery rage from the dining room, but a different type of anger. This was the cold, clear kind that arrives when you stop making excuses for someone and see them for who they truly are. He knew Sloane would be at that table. He let her drive 40 minutes in her nice dress. He just stood there. She thought about him standing there, turning the image over in her mind, examining it from every possible view. She had replayed the moment a dozen times. There was Grant, with his sparkling water, his feet firmly planted, wearing the expression of a man watching a predictable outcome unfold. For 4 years, she understood that Grant found any conflict incredibly difficult. She had always made adjustments for this weakness. She had smoothed over arguments, prevented fights, and managed his mother's emotions for him because he could not do it himself. But she was finished with managing things. She was finished managing his mother, his emotions, his comfort, and the false appearance that everything was perfectly fine. She was finished because she finally understood that in the space she had created by taking care of everything, something else had been allowed to grow. It was something she had not chosen and was never asked about. She had been making herself smaller and smaller, and Sloane had simply moved into the space she had left behind. That was the realization that finally broke something inside her. It was not just anger at Grant, and not completely anger at herself. It was anger at the patient, careful, accommodating woman she used to be. That was the woman who sat at a kitchen table, counting how many times her cranberry recipe was ignored, and never once said, "This is unacceptable. I will not sit here and take this." Well, she was not going to sit there any longer. At 4 in the morning, she noticed that she had not felt her daughter move for several hours. She knew this was often normal. She had read all the books, she had 3 different applications on her phone to track movement, and she knew that babies move less at night. They have sleep cycles, and being still at 4 in the morning was rarely a reason for concern. She lay perfectly still, waiting. 1 minute passed, then 2 minutes, but there was nothing. She pressed her hand flat on her stomach. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey, my sweet girl. I really need you to move. For me." 2 more minutes passed. She was standing up before she even consciously chose to. She found herself in Reed's hallway, her hand raised to knock before she decided to wake him. She had planned to handle it alone. That was her decision, but her hand knocked on the door anyway. Some choices are made by the body before the mind gets a chance to weigh in. Reed opened the door in 15 seconds, already mostly awake. She had not even knocked loudly. She said, "I have not felt her move. I know it is probably nothing. I know the odds, but I need to go to the hospital." Reed replied, "Get your shoes." He had his coat on within 60 seconds. The hospital was very quiet at 4:45 in the morning. The fluorescent lights made the world seem a little flat and surreal. A television in the waiting room corner showed a cooking show without any sound. A nurse at the front desk gave Cicely a practiced, warm smile, the kind someone perfects after doing the exact same thing 1,000 times. By 5:10, they were inside an examination room. Dr. Claire Oakes came in at 5:15. She was Cicely's obstetrician and had been from the very first visit. She was a precise and calm woman in her 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and listened with her complete attention. Cicely had liked her right away, and her opinion never wavered. Dr. Oakes performed the ultrasound herself. The screen filled up with motion. The heartbeat came through the speakers, steady, regular, and very present at 142 beats per minute. "She is perfectly fine," Dr. Oakes said. "Look, she is moving wonderfully. She might have just changed her position. Her back is now against your left side, which can make it harder to feel the movements." Cicely just stared at the screen, at the gentle curve of a tiny spine, at the motion of tiny hands, at the heartbeat. That steady, dependable 142 beats per minute heartbeat that knew nothing at all about dining rooms, or crystal water pitchers, or men who just stand there. She began to cry. She was not entirely sure why she was crying. It was partly from relief, the fear that had been sitting in her chest for the last hour finally letting go. But it was also for something else, something bigger and less defined that had been building up for a very long time, and it had finally discovered an escape. She cried softly, the way she always did when she needed to do it without causing a scene. Reed stepped out into the hall. Dr. Oakes sat on the edge of the exam table next to Cicely's chair. She was quiet for a moment, simply waiting. "I am sorry," Cicely said after a minute. "I knew she was probably fine. You made the right choice to come in," Dr. Oakes said. "Always. The statistics. Statistics do not offer much comfort at 4 in the morning. Cicely almost laughed, but not quite. Stress, Dr. Oak said, is not a small thing. It is not minor. Whatever is going on in your life right now, and I am not asking for details, your body is carrying it. Your baby is inside a body that is carrying it. That is important. I know. I want you to get some real rest, not just lying in the dark and counting all the things you know. Cicely looked at her. How did you know? Because every woman who sits where you are, sitting at 5 in the morning, has been lying in the dark, counting something. Dr. Oakes stood up. What do you really need, Cicely? Not what you think you should do, but what do you need? The question was different from most. It didn't come with an expected answer. It was just there, open and patient. Cicely thought for a long moment. I need to stop being a woman that things just happen to, she said. Dr. Oakes looked at her, not with surprise and not with a comforting speech, just with a steady, confirming gaze. Then start, she said, and left to get the discharge forms. Reed returned with 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee. He handed one to her without any apology. She took it, wrapping her hands around the cup as they sat in the hard plastic chairs of the exam room, the quiet hum of the hospital around them. She's okay, Reed said. She's okay, Cicely repeated. They sat for a while. Down the hall, a door opened, and a new sound filled the air. The cry of a newborn baby, announcing its arrival to the world. Cicely listened. Reed stared at the floor. Reed? Yeah? I want to call Carter Webb tomorrow morning. I'll arrange it, he said. No drama. No, I told you so. Just that. They drank their awful coffee in the quiet of the hospital as, outside the windows, the city began its slow crawl toward morning. The sky barely changed, just a subtle lightening of the dark, a hint of what was coming. Cicely's phone buzzed. She expected to see Grant's name. It was not Grant. The name on the screen read Sloan Whitfield. She stared at it. Beside her, Reed said nothing, carefully avoiding looking at her phone. She opened the message. I think we need to talk, just the 2 of us. I know you have no reason to agree, but there are things you need to know that Grant hasn't told you. I am sorry about tonight. I am sorry about so many things. She read it twice, then showed the screen to Reed. He read it once, his face unreadable. Do I answer her? Cicely asked. That, Reed said slowly, is completely your decision. She looked at the message for another long moment. Then she put the phone back in her pocket. She would sleep first. Then she would talk to Carter. Then she would think about Sloan. She had spent 4 years making decisions for other people. From now on, she would make them for herself, based on what would create the least trouble for everybody else. From this moment on, she was going to think for herself first. 3 days later, they met at a coffee shop on the east side of the city. It was 12 blocks from Reed's apartment building. Cicely had chosen the location for a reason. It was public, neutral, and close enough to leave quickly, if she had to. She had told Reed where she would be. She had Nora drive her. Nora was now parked outside, with her hazard lights flashing, holding a large tea and what she called the energy of a woman ready to step in. Sloan was already there when Cicely walked in. She had picked a table near the back, but she was not hiding. Her seat faced the entrance. She watched Cicely enter. She did not wave. She looked different from the woman at Dorothea's dinner table. The expensive cashmere sweater was gone. She wore a simple gray coat that she had not removed, as if she was not sure she had earned the right to get comfortable. There was a shadow under her eyes that was not there on Sunday. The last 3 days had not been easy for her either. Thank you for coming, Sloan said. Cicely sat down in the chair across from her. I have not decided yet if I should have. That is fair, Sloan said. A server came to their table. Cicely ordered a chamomile tea. Sloane ordered nothing at all. Say what you needed to say, Cicely said. Her tone was not mean, just direct. She was done making herself smaller for the comfort of other people. Sloane looked down at the table, then she looked up. Grant told me, she said, that you knew about the two of us. Cicely remained silent. He told me you had an agreement. He said the marriage was already over, and you both accepted it. And the pregnancy, he said it was a final try that did not work out. He said you were fine with it. He told you I was fine? Cicely said. I know how that sounds. I know exactly what it sounds like. I convinced myself it was true because I needed it to be. Sloane's hands were lying flat on the table. She was not putting on a show of sadness. She was simply living in it. I should have asked more questions. I should have, I do not know, looked more closely at what he was telling me. But I wanted it to be true, so I allowed myself to believe it. Yes, Cicely said. I know what that is like. I have been doing the same thing for 4 years, Cicely said. Sloane was quiet for a second. So, when you entered the dining room, and she froze, I need you to know I had no idea she would do that. I swear to you, I didn't know. What did you imagine she was going to do? I thought she would just make you feel so unwelcome that you would eventually give up and go home. That is what I thought was happening. I never imagined she would. She paused again. I know this doesn't excuse my part in it. Cicely looked at the young woman sitting across from her, just 27 years old. She was not some evil mastermind or a woman trying to wreck a marriage for fun. She was just a woman who fell for a story from a man who was an expert at telling them, and now she was living with the results of her choices. Cicely knew she could not forgive her yet. She was not ready. She was not sure if she would ever truly get to that kind of forgiveness. But she could finally see her as a real person, without the blinding rage and jealousy. You mentioned you had things to show me, Cicely said. Let's see them. Sloane took out her phone. She had everything saved, screenshots, text messages, and emails. She had kept them the way you keep things when a small part of you knows you might need proof one day. There was a conversation from last October where Grant told her clearly that Cicely knew all about their situation. A message from November called the pregnancy a complication but said it did not change the bigger picture. Then a string of messages from January laid out exactly what Grant planned for their future, a future that definitely included Sloane, but seemed to leave Cicely out of the decision. She passed the phone over to Cicely. Cicely scrolled through the evidence. She read every single message carefully, like she used to grade her students' papers, looking for what the words actually said, not what she was hoping to find. He had been lying to them both. He told Sloane that Cicely was okay with everything, that they had an arrangement. He had told Cicely there was nothing going on. He juggled 2 different stories at the same time, telling each woman exactly what she needed to hear so she would stay put. It was not because he was a monster. It was because he was the type of person who could never accept that anything was his fault. He would build a whole fantasy world of lies before he would ever stand in a room and let someone see him for who he really was. He used both of us, Cicely said. She said it softly, more for herself than for Sloane. He told each of us whatever version of the story would keep us under control. Sloane stayed silent. Do you still love him? Cicely finally asked. Sloane thought about it for a long moment. I loved a version of him that I created, she said. I am not sure that man ever really existed. At some point, Cicely thought, I started to disappear. Not just to him or his mother, but to myself. You were not invisible, Cicely said aloud. You were managed. Sloane looked up at her. Something unspoken passed between them. It was not kindness, and it was not friendship, or some easy, clean ending. It was something much more real than that, a moment of shared understanding. You can use these, Sloane said, pointing to the phone, for whatever you need. I will sign anything I have to. Why would you do that? Cicely asked. Because it is the truth. And because? She looked down at her hands. Because of what she did to you. You were pregnant. You did not deserve any of that. Cicely lifted her teacup, which was now a little cold. Neither did you, she said. You deserve to know the truth. She got up, put on her coat, and grabbed her purse. My lawyer will be in touch with you about the documents, she said. Sloane just nodded. Cicely walked out of the cafe. Nora was already out of the car and on the sidewalk by the time she got there. So? Nora asked. She gave me everything, Cicely replied. The texts, the emails, the whole story. Cicely started walking to the car. He told her that I knew about them. He said we had an agreement. Nora was completely silent for about 2 steps. Then she said, I am going to need a second. Take your time. I am taking it, she said, then paused. Okay. How are you feeling? Cicely really thought about the question. Strange, she said, but also very clear-headed. Nora unlocked the car doors. For the record, she said, I never really liked him. You came to our wedding. I wore a yellow dress. That is not proof of anything. No, Nora said, but I did wear it. Later that evening, Reed drove Cicely to see Carter Webb, her new lawyer. Carter was a sharp, serious man in his mid-40s. He wore reading glasses, not because he needed them to see, but because he used them as a tool when he was thinking. He sat with Cicely at a large conference table and reviewed all of Sloane's evidence and Reed's financial documents. He also looked at the business card from Douglas. He finally took his glasses off and looked directly at her. Mrs. Harmon, he said, I want you to take a deep breath and understand the power you now have. Carter explained the situation calmly. The financial records revealed a clear pattern. Over the last 8 months, Grant had been moving money. Not in huge amounts that would raise red flags, but slowly, bit by bit, through different accounts. It was not technically illegal, Carter explained, but during a divorce, these kinds of patterns tell a judge a very clear story. Sloane's evidence told another part of that same story. What you have here in these messages, Carter said, is a documented trail of his deception. Your husband lied to another person about the status of your marriage. He lied about you knowing and agreeing to the situation, which we can easily prove is false. Judges take this very seriously. He then listed everything Cicely was owed: the house, a financial settlement, and child support based on Grant's actual income, not the lower number he tried to claim. His company had an amazing year, Carter said, glancing over at Reed. A look passed between them that made it clear they had already talked about this in detail. He will fight it, Cicely said. His mother will tell him to fight it. That is a separate issue, Carter replied. Dorothea Harmon has no legal power in your divorce. What she has is a lifetime of control over a man who has never had to make a big decision on his own. Our job is to make it so expensive for him to fight that even she will see it is a losing battle. Cicely nodded. She had braced herself to be terrified sitting at that table. She was expecting to feel fear. Instead, she just felt a calm certainty. The feeling of a choice she had already made finally taking shape. She was not making a decision now. She had already made it in the hospital at 4 a.m. Now, she was just putting the plan into action. That same week, she moved into a new apartment. It was in Reed's building, 3 floors down from his own place. The unit had been vacant for 4 months, and Reed absolutely would not let her call it a favor. It is my building, he said. It is an empty apartment. My niece is going to live near me. That is the end of it. She decided to let him win that argument. She called Dr. Claire Oakes and changed all her future prenatal appointments to clinics near her new home. She called her health insurance company to update her information. She called 3 different moving companies to get prices. She did all of this in one afternoon with a notepad and a pen, feeling a sense of control she had not felt in years. Then she called her mother. Caroline Calloway picked up on the second ring from her house in Ohio where Cicely grew up. Cicely had been dreading this phone call. Caroline had always truly liked Grant, not just in the polite way mothers sometimes pretend to like their son-in-law. She had told Cicely at the wedding, "He is a reliable man." Reliability is an underrated quality, and she really believed it. But Caroline, at 58 years old, had lived enough life to know how to receive bad news without making it about her. She had raised 2 kids while working a full-time job and had buried her husband 3 years before. She had done it all without ever acting like a victim of her own circumstances. She just listened as Cicely told her the entire story. When she was done, there was a short pause on the line. "I am coming," Caroline said. "Mom, you do not have to do that. I will be there on Thursday. I already found a flight. Do not argue with a woman who has already paid for the ticket." Grant showed up at her new building on a Wednesday. Reed was the one who let him in, which surprised Cicely. She agreed to meet him in the lobby. She chose 2 chairs by the front window where anyone coming in or out could see them. It was a spot where she could get up and walk away at any time. Grant looked terrible, like a man who had not slept in days. He had that specific look of someone who hoped that being exhausted would feel like a punishment for what he did, only to find out it just felt like being tired. "Can we please talk?" he asked. "We are talking," she replied. He sat down and said, "I love you." She looked right at him. "I know you do," she said. "I completely believe that." For a second, he looked relieved, and she understood why, even though she had not said it for his benefit. "But I have been thinking," she continued, "about a certain kind of love, the kind of love that does not actually protect a person, the kind that loves them, but still just stands by and watches, the kind that loves them, but still chooses to manage them, always picking the easiest path instead of the right one." She looked down at her own hands. "I know that is a real kind of love. It is real. It is just not the kind of love I can build my life on." "You just stood there," she said. "She poured water all over me. Our daughter was inside me, and you just stood there." He did not have response. There was nothing he could say. He knew it, and she could see in his eyes that he knew it, and that, in a way she never expected, was enough. This brought her no victory, no satisfaction, only a weary sense of clarity that it was time to be done. "I want you to work with Carter," she said. "For the baby's sake, I don't want this to get messy." She rested a hand on her stomach. "But I need you to understand this is happening. My mind is made up, and it's final." He just nodded, looking down at his hands, then back at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that's not enough. I know how hollow that sounds. But I am." "I know," she replied, and then she stood. Sleep wouldn't come that night. Caroline was due on Thursday, and the movers would arrive in 2 weeks. A meeting with Carter was set for Friday. There were roughly 112 tasks on her list, all needing to be done in perfect sequence. She went into the kitchen, opened every cabinet, and started to reorganize everything at 2 in the morning. She did all 6 cupboards, the drawer next to the stove, and the cabinet over the fridge. Her pregnant belly made reaching the lower shelves tricky. Outside the window, the city was quiet. Caroline was asleep, and the simple sound of putting things in their proper place was deeply calming. She started to alphabetize the spices. She had never organized her spices before, not once. But now, for reasons she couldn't quite name, it felt like the only thing to do. She was on the letter M when her phone rang. It was Reed. "It is 2 in the morning," she said. "I know. Are you up?" "I'm alphabetizing the spices." A beat of silence. "Of course you are." Another pause. Dorothea hosted a luncheon today to give her side of the story to 12 of her friends. Cicely put down a jar of marjoram. I know. She texted me, said she wanted to clear things up. Douglas was there for 15 minutes, then left. He called Carter this afternoon. She was still. Douglas called Carter, she repeated. Seems he has made up his mind on a few things. He's ready to hand over some documents. Reed paused again. And there is one more thing. You might want to sit down for this. I'm standing. Cece, sit down. She sank to the kitchen floor, her back against a cabinet, surrounded by spice jars. Two of Dorothea's guests were recording the table for their social media pages. The camera was on when it happened. Cicely just stared at the jar of marjoram in her hand. It is 19 seconds long, Reed told her. She only watched the video one time. 19 seconds. A woman in a blue dress walks into a dining room. She lifts a heavy crystal pitcher with two hands. A long, slow, deliberate pour. And then, a voice. Perfectly clear above the clinking of silverware and chatter. I think it's time for you to go. Cicely handed the phone back to Reed. She sat for a minute with the feeling inside her. She thought she would feel a rush of victory, a sense of, finally, everyone will see. But what she felt was much quieter, more serious. It was the strange feeling of watching a consequence play out that she didn't have to cause herself. What do I do with this? She asked. Nothing, Reed said. That is the point. You do nothing at all. Someone else already did. Patricia, the woman who took the video, put it on her lifestyle page. It got 47,000 views before she realized what was on it. Now she is trying to take it down. But you cannot just delete things from the internet. Cicely nodded, thinking about Dorothea. For 4 years, she had tried to understand her. She had tried to find a way for their relationship to survive, a way for Cicely to shrink herself down small enough so the tension between them would finally disappear. Now she saw that she was never the problem that needed fixing. She was just the person standing between Dorothea's son and Dorothea's need to control her son's entire life. There was nothing she could have done to change that. She felt no joy as the video spread, only a surprising sense of pity. The next day, Douglas gave his documents to Carter. They were important financial records from the family trust. They showed a pattern of moving assets around for the last 8 months. It was not illegal, but it was deliberate. It was the careful shifting of money in preparation for a divorce. Dorothea had clearly decided it was coming, long before anyone said the word. She had been making her plans while Cicely was still going to Sunday lunches, bringing the perfect bottle of wine and quietly counting how many times her cranberry recipe was ignored. Dorothea had been ensuring Cicely would get as little as possible. Carter showed the papers to Grant, leaving Reed's name out of it. Grant sat at the conference table and read through every page. He was silent for a very long time. She told me, he finally said, his voice sounding small and broken, that you would leave me sooner or later anyway, that it was just a question of when. Carter asked, and what did you say to that? Grant said nothing. Carter let the silence hang there, then moved on. Sloane signed the statement Carter wrote for her without a second thought. She sent Cicely a short text after, I hope this helps. Cicely wrote back, thank you. It was the last they spoke for a very long time. In the week after the video came out, Dorothea called 3 times. Cicely never picked up. She had Carter take care of it, and Carter was excellent at taking care of things. The official apology was scheduled for 2 weeks later at Carter's office. Dorothea, Douglas, Cicely, and Reed were there, with Carter as a witness. In just 3 weeks, Dorothea seemed to have aged. She sat in her chair with less of her usual commanding presence, as if the foundation of her world, her absolute belief that she was always right, and above any consequences, had started to crack. She looked at Cicely. "What I did was wrong. I am sorry." The words were rigid, forced. Cicely could see how much it pained her to say them. She didn't say, "I forgive you." She was not ready for that, and might not be for a long time. Instead, she said, "Thank you," because the apology was proof of something important. Not that Dorothea had changed. She knew better than that. It was proof that accountability was real, that your actions have results, that you can't just storm through people's lives with a water pitcher and expect to get away with it. For now, that was enough. Grant agreed to every single one of Carter's terms. He didn't argue about the house or the financial settlement. He hired his own lawyer, a sensible man who knew which fights to pick. The whole process went forward with a smoothness that took Cicely by surprise. It also seemed to bring Grant some peace. Maybe he had never realized how much energy it took to live with so many lies at once. He was a better person when he was not trying to manage everything and everyone. She could see that now. It did not make her want to go back to him, but she saw it. The baby arrived on a Tuesday, March 31st. This was 6 weeks after the incident with the water, 3 weeks after the video made its rounds, and 2 weeks after the meeting at Carter's office. She was born at 7:42 in the morning. Reed was in the waiting room and had been there since 4 a.m. without a single complaint. Nora was there too with a bag of what she called waiting room essentials, which included 2 types of chips, a book she had no intention of reading, and a playlist that took her 3 days to create. Caroline was in the delivery room. Cicely had asked her to be there. Her mother had come up 2 days before the due date, stayed in the apartment downstairs, and never once said, "I told you Grant was not the one." She just made tea, organized baby clothes, and talked about normal things in the evening. Her garden, a book she was reading, the neighbor's new dog. Cicely now understood this was its own kind of deep love. Treating someone like their life was still normal, especially when it wasn't. Grant was also in the waiting room. He came as soon as Nora sent him the message. He stood in the doorway, his hands limp at his sides, and just looked at his daughter. Something in his face just broke. It wasn't guilt or sadness. It was something completely human and overwhelmed. It was the simple, staggering fact that this person was now real. This was his daughter. "What's her name?" he asked. "Clara," Cicely said. "Clara Caroline Harmon." He gave a single nod. His jaw clenched. He pressed his lips together. "That's a good name," he said. As she watched him look at their daughter, she thought, "He is going to love her. He may have failed as a husband, but he is going to love this little girl." She knew she could build a co-parenting relationship on that one truth. It wouldn't be simple. It would take more work than almost anything she had ever done before. But she could see the shape of it now. A functional arrangement centered on Clara's happiness. With enough space between the parents to let it breathe, she could make that work. She brought her daughter home on a Thursday afternoon in April to the apartment 3 floors beneath Reed's. The whole place smelled of the white tulips her mother had put on the kitchen table. White tulips were Cicely's favorite flower, not her mother-in-law's favorite, but hers. She laid Clara down in the bassinet in the bedroom corner she had prepared all by herself. The walls were a pale green she had picked out. The mobile hanging above was a gift from Reed, one she had not asked for but did not refuse. She sat in the rocking chair next to the bassinet. Outside, the city carried on. Upstairs, Reed was doing whatever he did on a Thursday afternoon. She could buzz him on the intercom, and he would be down in 4 minutes. She knew this without having to check. But she was not going to buzz him just yet. She just sat there in the rocking chair. The afternoon sun streamed through the window at that perfect angle it always did this time of day. She looked down at her daughter, Clara Caroline Harmon, just 3 days old. Her eyes were still trying to make sense of light and darkness and this whole business of being alive. Her tiny hands opened and closed with such serious purpose. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, she had company. Reed came up from downstairs, arms full of takeout bags, with the proud look of a man who had ordered far too much food and regretted nothing. Nora came in and sat right on the floor. "I can't sit on nice furniture with a baby," she said. "It's too stressful." Then she took Clara with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent the last 3 weeks practicing. Caroline was back for the weekend, settled in the comfy chair Cicely had put by the window because it had the best light and view, and Caroline had driven 4 hours to be there. And Douglas. This surprised her, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt right. Douglas Harmon was the very first person from that family to visit. To show his sincerity, he had given her Carter's card in the hall. He had shown her his paperwork. He had left Dorothea's lunch after only 15 minutes. He was doing the difficult, overdue work of a man who picked comfort over bravery for 35 years and was now making a different choice. She would not punish him for that. She would not act like it was easy or happened quickly enough, but she also would not shut the door he was trying to open the right way. He sat in the corner by the window, holding Clara. He looked at his granddaughter with an expression that was completely pure. No strategy, no motive, no careful appearances, just an old man seeing a new life and being moved by her existence. Claire blinked up at him. She opened and closed a tiny hand. He put his finger into her palm, and she grasped it. Reed came out of the kitchen. "Do you want the good takeout or the great takeout? I ordered both, and I will not apologize for it." "I need someone to answer the actual question." "Great takeout," Nora said right away. "This is not a real choice." "Why is this not a real choice?" "Because I believe in having options," Reed said. "Caroline," Nora turned to her. "Back me up." Caroline, in her chair by the window, asked, "What is great takeout? What does that even mean? Is it about the type of restaurant? Is it a kind of food? It is about quality," Nora explained. "The great one is just a better version of the good one." "Then the great one, obviously," Caroline said. This was never a hard decision. Cicely laughed. It came from a deep, real place, without any force. It was not the laugh of someone trying to feel better. It was the laugh of someone who had truly arrived at a new place, and was genuinely surprised to find it felt like this. Warm light streamed through the window. Her daughter was in her grandfather's arms. Her brother was playfully arguing with her best friend over food. Her mother was trying to keep up with a conversation that had already moved on. She had believed, in the worst of her dark months, that this was what she was losing: the special warmth of a room filled with people who wanted to be there. She thought that was the very thing she was sacrificing when she left the marriage. She saw now. She had not been in rooms like this for a very long time. She had been in nearby rooms, overflow spaces, at kitchen counters. This table was hers. Every single person here had chosen to be here. She was not managing anyone's feelings. She was not making herself smaller. She was not watching her every step. She was simply here. At 3 in the morning, Clara woke up to eat. Cicely lifted her in the darkness and sat in the rocking chair. The apartment was quiet around them in the unique way that apartments are at 3 a.m. It was not a total lack of sound, but the sound of a world taking a brief rest. She reached for her phone out of habit. It was the 3 a.m. reflex she had developed over 4 years. Lock, unlock, scroll for something, search for something, delete the search, and lock it again. She picked up the phone. She just held it. Then she put it down. There was nothing to look for. No accounts to check, no threads to read, searching for the thing she both needed to know and dreaded to find. There was no history to erase, nothing to control. There was only this. Clara was eating. The chair was rocking gently. The city hummed below. It was the unique sound of the deep night, which was not silence, but something fuller than silence. It was the sound of a world that was still here, still turning, still continuing despite everything. She thought about what she would tell the woman she was a year ago, that woman standing at the refrigerator in Dorothea's kitchen, her hand flat on the cool surface, counting her breaths and telling herself she was okay. She would say, "You are not staying because you are weak. You are staying because you love him, and you believe in the promises people make in gardens in June." Those are not character flaws. They are the things that make you who you are. But she would also say, there will come a time when the price out of staying is the same as the price of leaving. You will know that moment when it comes. Go. She gently pressed her cheek to the top of Clara's head. The baby smelled of the special warmth of a new person, like something that was not in the world 4 weeks ago, but was now completely here. I thought losing this marriage would undo me, Cicely thought. Instead, I learned what I was made of. I am not the person I was before Grant. I am not the person I was while I was trying to be good enough for his family. I am whoever I become next. That part, the comes next part, was what nobody tells you about. You think starting over means going back to the person you used to be, but you are not that person anymore, and the past you remember does not exist. Going back is impossible, and it is not even what you really want. Starting over was not about returning. Starting over was about arriving somewhere you have never been before. She held her daughter in the rocking chair at 3 a.m, in the apartment that belonged only to her, and she thought, the prison door was open the whole time. I just finally stood up and walked out. Clara finished eating and fell asleep on her chest with the total surrender to rest that only newborns can manage, as if sleep were a brand new country they planned to explore fully. Cicely held her. She did not reach for her phone again. She rocked back and forth, and the chair made its quiet sound. Below, the city breathed. Somewhere in the building, Reed was asleep 3 floors down, and tomorrow there were things to be done. There were calls to her attorney and paperwork and the 100 small jobs of a life being put back together. But all of that could wait for tomorrow. Right now, there was only this moment. Her daughter's soft breathing, the chair, the city, and the special light of 3 a.m, when the sky has not yet decided to be dawn. In Douglas's arms earlier that day, Clara had opened her eyes and looked around the room. She had looked at each face, not rushing, taking it all in, as if she were already judging the character of the people she had joined. Everyone who was important was in that room. Everyone who had chosen to be there. Cicely closed her eyes. She rocked her daughter. She was not scared of what was coming. For the first time and as long as she could remember, she was simply present in what was already here. That was enough. That was, she thought, more than enough. It felt like breathing. It was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.